Welcome back to Electron Stamps. Today I want to talk about light emitting diodes. LEDs are everywhere we look these days, so I would say they are very familiar components. But they have some characteristics that are not so well known, and some we just don't think much about. Let's start with some basics. An LED is a type of semiconductor diode, so it allows electrical current to flow easily in one direction, while tending to block flow in the other direction. At the heart of it, there's a p-n junction with a p-doped semiconductor material on the anode side and an n-doped material on the cathode side. When it's forward biased with positive voltage on the anode relative to the cathode, forward current flows through from anode to cathode as a result. Generally speaking, each electron crossing the junction gives up energy in the form of one quantum of light, with that photon's energy matching the junction voltage or band gap. 1 electron volt being 1 volt times the electronic charge, or 1 volt times 1.6 times 10 to the minus 19th coulombs approximately. The forward voltage drop will be higher because of the resistance of the bulk semiconductor, bond wires, etc. So the band gap energy produces light, while the resistive losses just produce heat. By the way, LEDs kind of suck as rectifiers, generally having very low reverse voltage ratings. So if you put one in a circuit where it might spend some time reverse biased, for instance, an AC circuit where it is lit during one half cycle and then dark the next, be sure to add a better rectifier in series, or the LED probably won't last very long. For a particular type of LED, the amount of energy taken from each electron and converted to a photon is pretty predictable. So the photons produced all have pretty close to the same wavelength. For example, a red LED might produce photons with wavelengths around 630 nanometers, while photons from a green LED might all have wavelengths close to 560 nanometers. Lower wavelength is higher frequency and hence higher energy per photon. Here I'm just talking about the energy carried by each photon. The amount of light produced depends on the number of electrons passing through the junction, that is, the amount of current flowing through the LED, and the optical power output depends on that and the junction voltage. Here's a sampling of some common LEDs in the old school T1 3/4 package in order by voltage drop. Let's light each one up with something close to its rated current and look at the resulting forward drops with a voltmeter. And I'll show the typical values in a list below. Here's my infrared LED. Wow, I can't see it, but my camera can see it. Here's the red LED, yellow, green, white, and blue. And here are the voltage drops I saw with a meter, and a little more information about each LED. Incidentally, I'm pushing more current through the infrared part than the others to match its higher rated current. The infrared LED here is similar to a visible light part, though we can't see it light up. But the camera can see it. My camera can see it. You can get an indicator card with special phosphors that convert infrared to visible light, which can be handy if you work with these a lot. The conversion isn't very efficient, so the visible light is pretty weak. Let's see if I can get one to show in the video. Okay, there it is, lighting up on the indicator card. Much brighter for the camera than for me. What I see is a little green smear on the indicator card. But what the camera sees is some bright pink or red spot on the card. Apart from the white LED, the actual spread of wavelengths for each part is pretty small, so we consider the light monochromatic. Let's look at the spectra of light from each part given in the data sheets. This one is the infrared part. Here's the red, here's the yellow, here's the green, here's the blue, and I'm putting the white one last. We'll talk more about that white lamp momentarily. By the way, the infrared LED was the first practical type, first manufactured in the 1960s. Several colors followed shortly, such as red, orange, yellow, and green. Efficient blue LEDs proved much harder to make and weren't commercially available until the mid-1990s. They paved the way for both full-color lamps mixing RGB LED light in varying proportions, as well as broad-spectrum white LED lamps such as the small one here. From a purist point of view, there's really no such thing as a white LED. The white lamp here is a composite device with yellow phosphors over a blue LED. Much of the blue light is absorbed by the phosphors and re-emitted as yellow-green light. Mixed with the remaining blue light, that gives a fairly broad spectrum light that appears white to us. I'm going to flip back to that white LED spectrum from the data sheet. You can see there's a sharp peak here in the blue region, and then there's this broader hump from the phosphors. This is similar to the operation of white fluorescent lamps, but in those the phosphors are white and the internal light source is ultraviolet. The ultraviolet is blocked by the special glass of the fluorescent tubes for safety reasons. I mentioned that RGB LEDs can be combined to produce almost any desired color of light, and that includes white. But that's not the same as the broad spectrum white produced using phosphors. Here's a programmable high-power LED lamp with both RGB and white LEDs. Flipping back and forth between the RGB white and the broad spectrum white, we can see that a white piece of paper looks about the same lit by either, at least here in the bright part of the beam. Now, many items exhibit somewhat different colors under these two light sources, such as the color filters shown here in front of the paper. That's because of the gaps between the peak wavelengths of red, green, and blue light in the RGB lamp, whereas the true white lamp fills in those gaps. Unfortunately, this isn't as clean as I had hoped because the camera is not showing what I'm seeing here perfectly. So I'll just describe what I do see here. There's a medium blue filter at the top, and when I switch to the RGB illumination, it looks much bluer. There's a jade filter in the middle, which looks nice and green here under the white lamp, and looks somewhat blue under the RGB illumination. The last filter is called Loving Amber, and it's a nice salmon or pinkish orange color under the white lamp, and it looks really red to me under the RGB lamp. This touches on the idea of the color rendering index, or CRI, which applies to many types of illumination, not just to LEDs. And now we come to one of my favorite obscure facts about LEDs. Not only can they act as light sources when we run electric current through them, they can also act like little solar cells, generating voltages and currents when absorbing light from other sources. So our little T1 3/4 LEDs can act as light sensors, provided the spectrum of incoming light includes the right wavelengths. With our power source disconnected, let's put the LEDs in some fairly bright sunlight and check the unloaded voltages with a meter. And I'll show you the typical values in a chart later. There's the infrared LED. Red, yellow, green, white, and blue. I think I can get a little more out of the white and blue if I point them more directly at the sun. Yeah. Let me pull up the values I read earlier today, which I also supplemented with indoor readings. First with a pocket flashlight pointed at each LED, and then with only dim room lighting. These LEDs can even fill both roles if necessary, sometimes lighting up and sometimes acting as detectors. Practical applications of LEDs as light sensors are rare, but I did take advantage of this feature in a prototype back around 2005. This is a depth finder that never made it to market. The monochrome LCD in this unit has a yellow-green LED backlight for night viewing, but it has good contrast without it in daylight. A big design requirement for this depth finder was simple one-button operation. Just an on-off button. So I needed a way to automatically turn the backlight on when it was needed. I thought about adding a light sensor, which would have meant one more component as well as one more opening to be sealed in the waterproof enclosure. Instead, I decided to try using the backlight itself as a light sensor. The downside to that is when the backlight is in use, it has to be turned off briefly to sense the ambient light, and then see if we can keep it off. That's not too noticeable provided it's done quickly and not too frequently. A few milliseconds of off time was enough, and once a minute seemed about right. Here the unit is running with no transducer connected, so the display is pretty boring. But I have some debug output enabled. In the lower right corner of the display, I'm showing the raw A to D value from the LED backlight along with the dominant state, whether the backlight is supposed to be on or off. It's off right now, as signified by the dash. Out in the sunlight, the value is fairly high, and the backlight stays off. Now we're in a dimly lit room, and the ambient light reading from the backlight is very low. In fact, it's 0 at the moment. So after a few minutes in the dark, the backlight should turn on. Et voila, the backlight is on. I hope to have a better demonstration of this dual role for LEDs in a couple months, but in the meantime I'm going to look for an easier video topic. Well, that's it for now. Goodbye, and thanks for watching. And special thanks to Hutch for the shirt.